All right, great. Well, that's a lot to live up to, that intro. So hi, I'm Brian. I'm an AngularJS core team at Google, and I've been working on this new router thing that everyone's been talking about. So before I get started, though, I wanted to announce that I'm not announcing anything controversial. I just found this cool flaming skull GIF on the internet, and I wanted to incorporate it in my presentation somehow. So I kept asking Igor, like, can I deprecate a bunch of APIs? And Igor was like, no, we need those. But he couldn't stop me from putting this in my presentation, so I did. Thank you. Thank you. It's my contribution. OK, so back to the real subject of the talk. I'm going to be talking about this new router. But before that, I want to give kind of a brief history of routing in Angular. So it's no secret that ng-route is too simple for like modern complex apps. It was from a simpler time. Like, it really hasn't changed too much over the past 5 years. To kind of fill the needs of developers, there's a great community effort called UI Router that many of you are familiar with and use. But for Angular 2, we knew that we needed to have a better first-class router. And so we kind of captured all the use cases. We looked at other solutions, figured out what was the state-of-the-art in routing, and we drafted a design that Rob Eisenberg presented at NG Europe. And if you haven't seen this talk, I highly recommend it. He goes more into the architectural decisions and the high-level things, whereas today I'm going to try and show you some code, get to the meat and potatoes. But it's really good. This gives you kind of some context as to what we were thinking. So we knew that we needed better for Angular 2, but we wondered if we couldn't also at the same time improve the situation for Angular 1. And if we're doing that, if we're having a router, which is kind of one of the highest level parts of your app, then could we also make migration a little bit easier? So the answer is yes, otherwise I wouldn't have posed that hypothetical question. But the way that this works is we basically transpile this router service from what used to be called AtScript and is now TypeScript, and I have to mentally shift. But we transpile it and we wrap it in an Angular 1 module. So this is like ES6 modules and TypeScript, and we just translate it, and you can use it in Angular. You can use the new router in Angular 1. Something to note is that the directives are implemented totally separately, and there's a build system that takes care of all of this. So I love a complex build system as much as the next web developer, but let's see what the actual code looks like. So to that end, I made this extremely impressive Hello World app that routes between two different components and shows kind of fading back and forth. There's a link to it on GitHub if you don't believe me. I know it's kind of staggering. And as you would hope, it updates the URL. Here it's showed with hashbang mode, but you can use HTML5 mode. All right, so let's look at code now that we've seen what the app is. So this is a pretty typical looking Angular module. We want to require this ng-new-router module. And then the only other thing that's kind of weird is that we have this $route config property of our app controller. And you can think of this sort of in the same way that you might use $inject. This just gives Angular some information about how routing works. And specifically, we're routing where the root path redirects to a welcome. Welcome redirects to a component called welcome, and /goodbye is a component goodbye. And I'll talk a little bit about what it means to be a component in Angular 1 in just a minute. But let's look at index.html. So again, this is pretty standard. We're using base href, which I consider to be a best practice. If you want to use HTML5 mode in Angular 1.3 and beyond, you actually have to specify a base href. And it's just a good thing to do if you want to be sane. Then we have a new directive called ng-link. And ng-link is linking to a welcome component. And again, I'll talk a bit more about components, but I'm hoping you see the relationship between the configuration and this link directive. And then the last kind of interesting feature is this ng-viewport. So this is basically the same thing as ng-view, but you can also nest them, and you can have multiple of them, and you can name them. So it's the same general concept, but it lets you do a lot more. Yeah. That's right. So that ng-link directive, when you actually run your app, it'll create hrefs. So you can right-click this and get something that you can copy and paste and send to your friend. And the nice thing about this is that you don't have to build your app in a way where if you re-architect it, you have to manually change a bunch of hrefs all over the place. So this is a goodbye component, and a component in Angular 1 is just a template and a controller, and the controller can have a route configuration of its own, and the template uses controller as syntax in a way that maps by a convention to the name of the component. So that sounds like a lot, but this actually gets you a lot closer to writing templates like you will in Angular 2. So here, this is pretty simple. We're using controller as, so goodbye.heading references the heading property of the goodbye controller when it's instantiated. And it also has out-of-the-box support for ng-animate. So there's this awesome animated GIF that I made that shows the classes being added and removed. If you've never done animations in Angular, all you have to know is that Angular will attach the classes at the right time. And you write a little bit of CSS like this. So you say, oh, we're going to change the opacity based on whether we're entering or leaving, and we'll use CSS transitions to describe the rate at which that happens. So I also mentioned that you can have nested and sibling components. Just to kind of show you how that works, this is a quick example. The demo is really boring, so I'm not actually going to show it. But the important part is that you can specify a map of components, and for each component, it's mapping this name, in this case left and right, to the component that it'll fill in that spot. So you can imagine how this works. All right, one of the interesting new features, though, of this router is that it exposes a bunch of lifecycle hooks. And I'll show what this means with another awesome animated GIF. So this is a pretty common scenario, I think, where you have some form and you want to prompt the user so that way they can save before they exit, or maybe you want to persist it some other way. But anyway, this would be tedious to implement with something like ng-route, where you'd have to listen to all of these different change events. With the new router, you would write something like this. So in this case, there's just a couple things that I want to point out. You can parameterize your path, and it uses more or less the same DSL as you're used to from maybe Express.js or from ng-route or from UI-router. Like it's pretty standard stuff. It's unsurprising. And in this case, this links to an edit post. And one of the consequence then of being able to parameterize it is in your ng-link, you also then can pass in whatever the value of the parameter is, and that's what it will use to construct the href of that link. So in the actual edit post itself is where we have the behavior where we bring up this modal dialog and ask you whether or not you want to save. So again, we have $route params, pretty unsurprising. It works just like ng-route. So here's where we get a hold of that ID so we know which post we're talking about. And then we have this can deactivate function on the prototype of the controller. You don't necessarily need to use this prototype style or this class style controllers. Just as long as the controller has a method called can deactivate, the router will know to run it at the right time. So what this hook does is it compares the current content with the persisted content, and if it's the same, it says, all right, you can go on your way. Otherwise, it pops up this modal dialog, and this SaveModal.getResponse happens to return a promise. And if the promise accepts, then it continues navigating. And if it rejects, then it goes back. And so you can see how it's pretty easy to build up complex behaviors. There's actually a bunch of different lifecycle hooks. So the order of things is for each viewport in the system that already has something in it, we ask it first, can the current component in there reactivate? Meaning, can we reuse it? So this might be useful for optimizations. This might be useful for if you have some complex animation where you're moving DOM around and rearranging it. But if it says no, then you continue on and you say, all right, can you deactivate? So this is where we saw that modal come up. Assuming that's all right, we instantiate the new component. We ask it, can it activate? This hook is where you might start implementing something like auth or login. And then assuming all goes well, it deactivates the old one and activates the new one. And again, it does this first for every viewport and then top down for every level of routing. So you can compose these complex behaviors without having to understand, how every part of the system navigates. All right, so in the keynote, it was mentioned that there's migration with this new router. And so there's kind of two key aspects here. So the Angular 1 bindings are still a little bit of a work in progress. The Angular 2 bindings, rather, for the new router are a little bit of a work in progress. So how you use the new router in Angular 2 will probably be a little bit different. But the key thing to notice is that this configuration, like this object that you're passing in here, is exactly the same between the two. So that already makes things conceptually very similar. There's not a lot of context switching that you have to do. If you're using the new router, the way that you use it in Angular 1 is the same, essentially, as the way you'll use it in Angular 2. And the other thing in this incremental strategy that Igor mentioned is that you can do it in any sort of combination of ways. So you can run Angular 2 inside Angular 1, or you can run Angular 1 inside Angular 2. So you can do kind of top-down or bottom-up, and you can even mix these strategies. So you might... Thank you. All right. So you might have an app that looks like this. This is an Angular 1 app using the new router, and each of these is some level of routing or some component. And so what you might do is you might rewrite just this one leaf component here because you're doing a new feature anyway. And then you might continue to do its parent, and then the next parent, and then work your way down. And then maybe these last two are kind of expensive, so you wait a while until features ship. And like the key thing here is just that it's flexible. So regardless of how you've built your application or where you're planning to take your application, you can kind of strategically decide where you're going to migrate to Angular 2. All right, so that was kind of where we are right now and kind of the core features. But let's talk a little bit about the future. So what about ng-route? So it's not going anywhere, but it's not getting any new features either. This really shouldn't be too much of a surprise. ng-route has changed very, very little since its inception. So should you use it? Probably not unless your app is very, very simple. So why not? Why did we make this whole new router? Why didn't we just adapt UI router? Like now I have to choose between using the new router in Angular 1 or using UI router if I'm using Angular 1. And it's just the Angular 2 router is built with Angular 2, or sorry, the new router is built with Angular 2 in mind. And so although it runs in Angular 1, it has this nice migration path. Whereas I think you'd have to break some things in UI router. But the good news is that we're collaborating on a solution on GitHub to try and make it so you don't really have to make this choice. So if you have a large app that's built on UI router, we're going to work on a way to make it easy to migrate to the new router. And if you're starting out a new Angular app, I would urge you to take a look at the new router and give me some feedback, because you can really shape where it goes and what it looks like. So again, kind of details forthcoming, but you can follow along on GitHub. And when will it be done? So the new router will go 1.0 with bindings for Angular 1 as soon as Angular 1.4 is released. And beyond that, it'll have independent Semver releases. So it'll continue to move forward, and Angular 1 will continue to move forward as well. And you can actually kind of cyberstalk me. I actually publish stand-up style updates on all the work that I'm doing. So you can go check that out. There's a link in my slides if you can't memorize this. And beyond that, there are plenty of things in 1x that could be improved to make the routing situation a little bit better. So one thing that I commonly hear is that people want to do lazy loading in Angular 1. And right now, there's not a great way to do it. So I've been working on this proposal to add a new API to the DI in Angular 1 to make this just a little bit better. So the new router, when used in Angular 1, would be able to use this API and would be able to handle lazy loading of your code for you. All right, so I'm up here talking, but it really wasn't me that did most of this work even. This is shoulders of giant stuff. So first I'd like to shout out to the Ember folks. They wrote this library called Route Recognizer that the new router actually uses. And it's really cool. It lets you give it a configuration, and then it understands how to serialize and deserialize routes and URLs and parameters and all these sort of things. So that's amazing. They did a really good job. Definitely check it out if you're interested in like router internal things. I'd also like to shout out to Rob. A lot of the great architectural and design decisions came from Rob and from his experience working on Durandal. So that's just, working with him has been invaluable. So thank you, Rob. And I also wanted to shout out to a couple people who have been super active on GitHub on this repo. So Pascal, Sandra, and Blake. You guys just like constantly pop in and have great ideas and give good feedback. And I wouldn't be able to show off some of these things without their help. And if you're interested, you can join this list. So although I said 1.0 will be soon, in my opinion, we're just getting started. And you know, as long as we keep having good ideas, we're going to keep implementing them. So go check out, the docs are on angular.github.io. I imagine they'll move elsewhere soon. But you can also check out GitHub. There's README, there's a contributing guide. I'm pretty diligent about responding to issues and filing stuff away into milestones. So I'm excited to see what the future of routing will be like. Thank you.